everyone, this is Liz Hutner-Lone, and I'm from the MIT Teaching Systems Lab. I'm a member of the Launching Innovation in Schools course team here. We're so excited that you could join us for this special event with Peter Senge. And pardon me, I'm just going to mute one thing here. We always have to find out what we need to mute. It's great to see that we've got learners from several different places. I saw in the chats that we've got Brazil, we have the Netherlands. And Peter is here, and he's really excited to take your questions. And I'm going to go ahead and share my screen so that he can talk with you now. All right, Peter, please go ahead when you're ready.
Hello, everyone. Hi, Liz.
Hi, Peter.
It's working, huh?
Go ahead. Just we're ready to start rolling.
Okay, good. Well, I'm looking forward to this. It's been fun to be part of the process of creating this Launching Innovation MOOC, and it's also been running a little bit now without me, so I'm feeling a little bit lost and disconnected. So I really appreciate kind of welcome me back in. But it's also part of the ongoing work. We have many different projects with the ODL group at MIT, and so this is one of them. So I like to stay in touch, but particularly in touch with all the folks who are actually out there going through this process.
That's great. Peter, I know that we're both talking right now, but as we talked about, so this course is self-paced, so our learners have seen all the material right now. Just wanted to know that we as the course staff looked through the forums a little bit, and we found a few themes that we wanted to have you talk about. So one of the questions that we looked at was, how can you encourage teachers to try a new innovation, when they're already swamped? So we've got teachers that, their leadership is demanding them to try this, implement that. So I thought that our learners would really benefit from hearing from some of your thoughts on this.
Well, it's a problem everywhere, of course, and it's really, there's a tangible and an intangible part of it, and I think you have to kind of distinguish the two in strategizing about this. The tangible part is the simple one, right? Teachers have so many stuff, everybody always says, how do I put something else on my plate, because then whatever I've got on it already slips off. I think the intangible part, though, in many ways is more problematic. From my perspective, over the past decade, really maybe even over the last couple of decades, teachers' sense of autonomy and their sense of efficacy has really declined. Obviously, I'm speaking in generalities. There's lots and lots of exceptions in this, and the exceptions are really important. But there's, some have called it the deprofessionalization of teaching. That whereas in other places, this is a problem around the world, but it's not everywhere. Teachers still feel like, well, what happens in the classroom is kind of up to me. And I have general ideas, I have criteria, I have standards and all that, but I have to put things together to kind of really determine what I'm going to do. So there's a much higher level of autonomy in that sense. And I think over the long term in the US, that has steadily deteriorated in most schools for most teachers. And that attitude is as big a problem as the tangible lack of time. I mean, the truth is everybody's busy. No one has extra time. It's never a question of time per se. There's only so much time in the day, and there's very few of us who are working in settings where we have a lot of slack, excess time. We're trying to figure out, well, what should I do now? It's quite the opposite. So it's really not time per se. It's the ability to prioritize and an attitude that, of course, I should be trying new things. Because if I'm not, my work is just not going to be very exciting. And if I'm not, I know I'm not doing the best I can possibly do for my kids. So that's the attitude part of it I was referring to as the intangible. And the reason I think it's useful to distinguish those two is that not everybody feels that intangible equally, right? So you might say the overload condition, the kind of physical or material or more tangible condition, that's pretty much true of everybody. But not everybody has the same degree of internalization of, all I can do is do what I can do and I can't do much else. And I'm really kind of in this perpetual, running on a treadmill mode. So I think the first answer for me to this question of how do you support teachers when they're all overloaded is find the ones who have not internalized it as much. You work with the ones who are really seeing that there is something new I want to be doing. They're dissatisfied. They know there's always something they can do better. Sometimes we'll think, well, that's always the young people or the new people. Maybe, maybe not. I do think you'll find some people with 10 years or more of teaching experience who are also continually searching out and implementing and trying new things. So first off is focus on the innovators. And I don't mean that to overly generalize, saying there are people who aren't innovative, but they don't have that same sense of efficacy and autonomy. So, and then secondly is connect them. Because no matter how courageous or prone to take risks some individuals will be, it's tough doing it by yourself. We've always found that the single key initial leverage in significant innovations spreading in schools is strong, self-organizing peer networks. So teachers who are really innovating, helping each other, supporting each other. It's really way too challenging to do it by yourself, even if you are one of the ones predisposed to be doing new things.
So Peter, this made me think, you've done a lot of work around school change. Could you help our learners kind of understand sort of some of your broader experiences? I mean, you've written a book, you've worked with a number of schools. I think it'd be great for them to hear more about that.
Sure. Yeah, it's been a long journey, and really, particularly for the last decade or so, but over a decade ago, after the original book, The Fifth Discipline, was published, we discovered, even though it really wasn't focused on education, lots and lots of teachers and schools were picking up the ideas and saying, hey, shouldn't my school be a learning organization, which was the whole motif of the book, The Fifth Discipline. And that led to the gradual identification of a network of schools, public schools. We only really concentrated on public schools, really across the K-12 spectrum, who were busy trying to create a different sort of climate. That'd be a simple way to say it. A climate that really would encourage risk-taking, that would encourage collaboration, the very things I was talking about a little while ago. It's fine that there's always a few teachers who are trying new things, but you need more than a few. And once you really focus on the school climate and culture, there's a lot of critical roles of administrators as well as teachers. So you start to see certain types of partnerships that are really needed. Teachers tend to be adverse to making mistakes. But of course, that's the only way you make innovation is you make mistakes. It's the way you learn anything. How the school climate either encourages or discourages learning through trying new things and making mistakes is a very significant role of administrators. Some administrators do a really good job of working on that always. They're always trying to, are we creating an environment here that really makes it safer for our teachers to try new things? And the other thing that the administrators can have a fair amount to do with is just time, reflection time. We found so many examples where a principal will kind of knows this and tries to organize the schedule where the teachers will in fact have time to help each other, to reflect, and to build those kind of peer networks. So that was the long-term journey, and really in the last few years it's accelerated a lot as the MIT JWEL initiative has started, the World Education Lab here at MIT, which is allowing us to focus particularly on key networks within and beyond the US that are really leading a lot of the deeper changes.
That's great. So Peter, I'm just taking a look at the chat here. So we have a learner, Aruna Solaris, who says, it's so good to meet you. So apparently his group translated and published The Fifth Discipline in Lithuania 10 years ago. So I think that's kind of a cool connection to point out here. Hello, Aruna Solaris, and I do, please, I apologize if I'm pronouncing your name incorrectly. So, Peter, you use the term learning organization. So our schools are going to hear about that later in the course, actually in Unit 6, but I was wondering if you could just explain it succinctly.
Well, I think the key elements at a practical level of what I've been saying right now, environments that encourage risk-taking, that encourage collaboration so that teachers don't feel isolated when they're trying new things, and that find ways to also nurture somewhat larger networks. I mean, gatherings. It's as simple as, can you take a half day off once every 2 months and bring people together in different subject areas or different parts of the school? What are you trying? What's working? Where are you really needing help? Those are the larger, not just small peer networks, but the larger networks. So all of the above are critical elements of building a more of a learning-oriented culture. You can think of it by analogy. You all know in every school, you walk into one classroom and it's kind of magical. And you can literally walk into the classroom next door and it's exactly the opposite. So this kind of climate or culture or atmosphere, today more and more, we call it the generative field of a real learning environment, is subtle, but it's not abstract. You can really feel it. Ask the kids where they want to be. My kind of metaphoric joke about this, and I don't mean it entirely as a metaphor, what if school were voluntary? You'd learn a lot in a hurry. What if kids could show up and go wherever they want? Now, I'm not advocating that. I know there's a lot of other facets of this, but it's that spirit of when the kids are really engaged, it's because the teachers are really engaged, and you can feel it. So a learning organization is nothing more or less than the tools, methods, strategies, you might say the larger even infrastructures that support creating this kind of climate and culture of real excitement in learning.
That's great. Thanks so much, Peter. So one thing that we wanted to consider talking about today, and I know that our learners are very interested in, is how can we better include student voice in kind of the innovations and experiments we're trying in our schools? And what thoughts do you have on that?
Well, like peer networks, we've always found that to be almost a defining feature of schools that really create an environment for continuous innovation and learning. So we back up one step. The other thing that we've always found about peer networks that really matter is when ideas travel. In other words, when a teacher's trying something over here and you find out that a year later, 8 other teachers are trying it over here, the critical factor is teachers see what kids have done. So I can't tell you how many examples, it can be very mundane. They don't even involve a website or anything, seeing student work. So the teachers who are really good at promoting new ideas are doing it through the vehicle that touches other teachers emotionally. It's not just the excitement of the idea. It's not just a new pedagogy or a new tool or a gadget you're using in your classroom. They actually see something a student has done and they go, oh, I had that student last year. I can't believe she's doing that now. That's really amazing. So what really opens the process, what really moves it, the energizing, is really teachers connecting with kids doing something that really touches the teacher. And if you think about that a little bit, it makes so much sense. Again, why are we teachers? We're teachers because we really care about kids learning. Nothing excites me more than seeing something a kid can do. Now, you take that idea one step further. Once you start to tap the potential of innovative student work, you're a very small step away from the voice of the student. Because it's one thing to see it, it's another thing to hear the student talk about it. So we've always found that when you look at how these larger networks really thrive and sustain themselves, the importance of innovative student work, not teacher work, student work, and the direct voice of the student. So when you have those gatherings, you bring the students in right in front and they say, hey, we tried this, we tried this. Here's what's really exciting for us. And the kids are sharing their own work. There's so many ways to do this. I mean, there's obviously no one formula or answer, but the guiding principle that what motivates teachers willing to stick their neck out is the belief that it could really make a difference for their students. and seeing tangible examples of student work as activating that process. And then you just add, and by the way, whenever you can, students sharing that themselves. So students become a critical part of the innovation process when it really takes off.
That's great. Peter, do you mind encouraging our learners to ask some more questions? So it looks like we may have one in the chat, but I think if they hear you really want to answer them, they're going to ask more questions.
Yeah, I mean, look, at first principle of all learning is questions, not answers. So the more you can help us focus on the things that are most important to you, the more well used this time will be. So yeah, please do. Doesn't matter. Questions don't have to be any one way or another. They're just real.
Yeah, it looks like we had a learner make a comment here. This is Andre de Muldor, who says in his former school there was an extracurricular kind of proposition that was kind of a making of a website, and he saw that there were lots of kind of issues with kind of lack of continuity, you know, of the work sort of after the program. And
right.
I think this is something educators see a lot. They see, you know, one person really take on an initiative, that person leaves, and it's like, you know, everything's in disarray.
Yeah, that's one of the reasons that I make such a big deal about these strong teacher peer networks. They really are the key to continuity, you know, because teachers will come and go. If you depend too much on either a critical teacher or a key administrator, you know, we had this great principal and created all this space for us to do this stuff. Oh, but she's gone now. The peer networks are really critical for maintaining change over time, because the lack of continuity, and put it more bluntly, what a lot of teachers are always talking about, the flavor of the month. And these are particularly problems when you have change driven from the top. Some principal gets really excited about something, read a new book, went to a seminar, whatever. Now we're all going to do this. And by the way, you're all going to get a 3-hour training in the next month. You know, teachers all go, you know, I've seen this before. They come, they go. Even if the ideas are exciting. See, it really doesn't have anything to do with the merit of the ideas. A lot of teachers go, oh, yeah, that could really be useful. But the problem is, in a year or 6 months from now, we're going to have to jump on another, you know, hot new idea. So I think the lack of continuity is often connected with changes driven from the top. And in turn, when there's deep ongoing collaboration across boundaries within the teacher body, there tends to be a lot more continuity. Then a new idea comes along and, you know, 3 or 4 people are trying it out, and either it takes root or it doesn't. And there's a much more orderly process of going from, you know, the initial trying out of an idea to the gradual, which is always gradual, integrating it into the way we do things. That process has to be led by teachers, and it has to be supported by strong peer networks. You cannot get that from the top down.
So, Peter, we've got some more student questions here. We have Emery Maher here. She asks, how do you get the upper administration on board? We have a bottom-up system of ideas.
Well, that's great. I'm not sure exactly what she means. We've got a bottom-up system of ideas and we don't get the top engaged.
I think maybe we can ask him or her to clarify, but I think that's a great place to start.
Yeah, okay. So the thing I said before can also work for administrators. In other words, what's going to get an administrator connected to some idea that's bubbling up from the bottom? Obviously, teachers are enthusiastic. That's critical. But very often, really seeing student work. So when I've seen teacher groups, you know, bottoms up teacher innovators really do a good job of getting administrators on board, they usually do it through showing the administrators what the students have accomplished. Because keep in mind, most administrators are teachers, were teachers, maybe they're still teachers. They have that kind of natural teacher openness, like, wow, your kids did that? You know, that's very impressive. Yeah. So it's the same process I was characterizing before. You can't expect as a teacher, just because you're excited about it, it's enough for an administrator. They too are swamped. They too have got a million things on their plate. They've got all this pressure on them for whatever, student test scores, whatever. So you've got to engage them emotionally. And again, the thing you have to remember again and again, there's no more surefire way to engage educators emotionally in a new idea than to show them what the students are doing with the idea.
Great. We have another question. This comes from Arunas Solaris. Oh, sorry. Emery had a follow-up question. They want to know how long you've been in the field of education. So why don't we answer that before I go on to the next one?
You mean for how long ago was I a student?
I guess you answer however you want, Peter. That's great.
um, well, as I was saying, when the fifth discipline first came out, which is a long time ago, 1990, the book was first published and gradually got translated into a lot of different languages by, 95, 97, 98. It was a bestseller in China in 1997. So it really had started to spread around the world. And then it was more a matter of running after the educator innovators, since we were very focused on organizations in general. And at that time, most of the work in the first couple of decades, the 80s and the 90s, was in business, not in schools. And the reason for that is very simple, and educators will appreciate it. The businesses were more open, right? They are less hierarchical. You get a few people really excited about an idea, they can take it off. And if it works, if it really helps meet customer needs or what have you, it's easy for it to take root. Education tends to be a more centrally controlled industry. So it took a few years, and it really wasn't until the late 1990s, mid to late 1990s, that again we saw a lot of schools starting to do this and a lot of educators starting to work at it. So we started working on a fifth discipline field book for education. It was called Schools That Learn. It was published, the first edition, in I think 99. Okay, so that was the work of the 90s. Then a new edition came out in 2010 or 2011. And now, as I say, over this last several years, the focus has really gotten, almost for me, exclusively on education. So it's been a journey of about 20 years, and particularly the last 10 years with more and more focus.
So Peter, Emery wants to push back against something you said. So about administrators, yes, they were teachers, but they haven't been in a classroom for 15 plus years.
Well, that's fair enough. And that's part of the reality you have to take seriously when you're trying to get administrators on board. But I still would maintain that a lot of them do care about real innovations in children learning. They may not be up to date on a lot of stuff. Of course, they're not up to date, but it's not that they are disinterested. I mean, this is always the problem with change leaders over here trying to convince somebody else over here. That somebody else over here could be a principal or an administrator, or could be somebody in wherever. You think that they don't care. You think that they're disconnected. You think that you've got to somehow force them or coerce them, or at the best persuade them. And you lose touch with them as people. And I think that it's the single kind of most common pitfall that change leaders get into. They're busy on their initiative, and they have a lot of stereotypes about them over there who really aren't engaged. And that's why I say, the best ways to break through those kind of impediments are student work and student voice. We found on a larger scale, when larger innovations have really taken off, oftentimes it's literally because of the students leading it. And people go, wow. We had one superintendent who has really got this message a long time ago. But between him, he was the head of the whole system, and his teachers were lots of principals who didn't really get it.
Peter, I just lost your, you're back. That's great.
I know, wait for just a second. So I was just going to tell one quick story of a superintendent who really understood the power of student voice. And yet, most of his principals and senior teachers didn't get it at all. He had plenty of teachers innovating in his system. Teachers weren't doing much. And so he created a really clever idea. He had weekend sessions where students would organize what we call World Cafes for the community. So they would invite their parents, they would invite members of the community, and they would be focused on community issues. And what the kids were learning how to do was be effective leaders of conversations about real issues in their community. A couple years later, the teachers really started to notice, wow, I'm hearing so much great things about your Saturday once a month cafe sessions. And you have hundreds of members of our community showing up. How are you doing that? And then next thing you know, the teachers got really interested in what the students were doing, and the whole thing started to take off on another scale. So, there's no simple answer to this, but you just have to remember whatever stereotypes or generalizations we have about them, the people who aren't with it, who are fighting the innovations, who are, stuck in the past, or again, we have a lot of generalizations. They may be perfectly valid at some level, but we have to find strategies that help those people connect emotionally to the benefits of the change.
So Peter, we also have a question from Arunas here about, from your perspective, kind of new ideas in education worth exploring. Anything sort of cutting edge in your view that you'd like to share with our viewers today?
Well, that is really the reason that this new MIT initiative, the World Education Forum, World Education Lab, was created. And what I'm meaning by that is that around the world, there's so many great innovations occurring in education, in primary and secondary education. The problem is that they tend to be scattered around. You know, there's a little joke in the tech world, the future is already here. It's just not very evenly distributed. And that's what we have today in education. So in China, they like to talk about the flipped classroom. Social emotional learning is a worldwide movement. The importance of project-based learning is an idea that's been around for a long time, but it's really starting to take root in a lot of places. How we really integrate contemplative, social, emotional, and substantive or systemic learning in a more integrated whole. That's the big project we have today with a network of schools around the world. It's called the Compassionate Systems Framework. That one's being led right now by the IB network, the International Baccalaureate Network of Programs in Schools, many of which are in public schools, many of which are in private schools. But they're really a remarkable, innovative network because they have a real long-term vision for the future of primary and secondary education in today's world. So there's no shortage of things going on. I think that wherever you are, you can find innovations probably in your neighborhood. And what we're trying to do with the World Education Lab is draw attention to these as a global phenomenon so as to more rapidly build a critical mass.
So one of the things that you've talked about quite a bit today, Peter, is kind of strong teacher peer networks. Any advice for participants about building those, maintaining those?
Well, I think I initially was careful to characterize them as self-organized or self-generated peer networks. A lot of teachers, it varies a lot by region, but in the US, for example, a lot of teachers have been told you're now going to be part of this PLC, peer learning community. And when you're assigned to something like that, my experience is 90% of the time, it's a disaster. Teachers hate it. It's one more thing they have to do. But the natural process of helping one another, in other words, you're trying something new. Some parts were working, some parts are not working. Who do you go to for help? I have a great friend who I first learned this principle from. He's an algebra teacher. He's really a leader in our Compassionate Systems Network. And he's built a remarkable system for kids literally teaching each other algebra. And for the first 5 years, he was really struggling with this. But he had a science teacher who was a good friend who was in the room next door. And so he said, once a week, we'd get together for coffee. And we would talk about what was working, what wasn't working. So this term peer network, I mean, please don't confuse it with imposed peer learning communities. It's the naturally arising social phenomenon when people who respect each other are helping one another. And their help is always grounded on practical problems. And through that process of helping, they build peer networks.
So, Peter, our learners have seen this in the course, and they also may know that you've done a lot of work around systems thinking, and specifically also around sharing systems thinking with students. Any insights around, using systems thinking with your hopefully not mandatory PLC, hopefully your organically formed PLC, or sharing it with your students? Just, I think it'd be great to hear from you on systems.
Well, there are a lot of resources out there for those who are interested in systems thinking, because it's been kind of a grassroots movement for a long time, for really two decades now. There are really good resources. And usually the teachers who are really kind of stepping ahead on this are finding these. So you can just Google systems thinking in education. You'll find a group called the Creative Learning Exchange, which is actually based here in Boston, that has all kinds of books and online materials. You'll find a group called the Waters Foundation, which is much more into teacher capacity building and a lot of great online stuff. But if you just Google systems thinking in education or systems thinking in schools, you'll find a lot. There's a very good resource literally called the Systems Thinker, which is mostly articles, short articles, like newsletter articles. That's actually put out by the Amidier Group. They're the family who founded eBay. They want to make systems thinking as widely available in the world as possible at no cost to whoever needs it. You'll find a link there to something called the Systems Leaders Field Book. Or you can just Google System Leaders Field Book, and you'll get to the Academy for System Change. So usually resourceful teachers can find a lot of resources out there, and they vary from things that are either focused on classroom application, like the Creative Learning Exchange, the Waters Foundation. They're really focused on classroom application, to ones that are much more focused on that plus school climate management leadership. Those are like the Systems Leaders Field Book. And that's literally how this movement has always gone forward. The main thing today is there's a lot of online resources.
So, Peter, before we end today, I just was hoping, is there an inspirational story from a time you've worked with an educator or your experience, seeing a school work on an initiative in a certain way that you could share with our learners?
Well, there's a video, I think it's currently posted on the Waters Foundation website. And there's no video I've used more often in the last 5 years, 4 or 5 years. It's 3 boys, they're 6 years old, and they're sitting down and trying to understand why they're having fights on the playground. It was completely spontaneous. Teacher, mentor walked by, saw the kids talking, flipped out her phone and said, "Could you explain to me your little feedback loop?" And I've shown this to lots of audiences, and people are pretty blown away. They can't believe 3 6-year-old boys have this level of sophistication. They draw a little feedback loop of mean words and hurt feelings. And the teacher says, "Well, explain how this works." And they say, "Well, this is why we have fights in the playground. First, we have mean words. Then we have hurt feelings. Then we have more mean words. Then we have more hurt feelings. Then we have more mean words. Then a fight breaks out." And then literally, this is what the kids say. "We're thinking about all the ways to intervene in this system." And that you see these little marks on the drawing. "We tried this. That didn't really work. We tried saying, 'I'm sorry.' That kind of worked. But we think there's higher leverage elsewhere." So this just shows you that if you allow the kids to use tools, basic systems learning tools, like the ones I said you can find on a lot of these websites, what you do is you cultivate a natural systems intelligence of children. The whole compassionate systems effort around the world now has this one core premise. Kids are natural systems thinkers. They want to understand the systems of families, friends, playgrounds, and then if they start to build a foundation there, they'll start to say, well, why isn't there enough water for everybody in our community? Or why are people throwing away all this garbage? Very quickly, in very natural ways, the kids will identify the larger systemic problems in their local community. And then, of course, by the time they're 10 years old, they want to work on climate change. So there's a very natural progression from the very local, the very immediate, which is what's real, to the younger children, to as they get older, slightly more larger scale, up till the real issues our society faces. So our vision is very simply that this process could progress throughout the entire primary, secondary curriculum to the point we'd actually be graduating students. The IB has a simple phrase. Their overall goal is to develop caring global citizens. That's a lofty aspiration for all of us as educators.
I agree. Peter, thank you so much for your time today. I really appreciate it, and I know our learners have appreciated attending, and also the learners that will watch the recording later will really appreciate it. It's been great working with you on launching innovation in schools, and thank you so much.
Real pleasure, Liz. Thank you for organizing this.
Of course.
And I hope you guys continue to enjoy your work on the MOOC.
Thanks. So everyone, I just wanted to thank you again all for coming. We're really enjoying seeing your work in the forums, as is the rest of the course team. There's also instructional designers, Abby and Kelly, who you'll see as well. Also, Justin very much just appreciates seeing the problems of practice that you're wrestling with and the important work that you're trying to do. So Thank you again for attending, and looking forward to seeing you guys in the forums.